So my name is Dr. Edwards. I operate the Responder Health Lab at Tennessee Tech University in Cookeville, Tennessee. And I'm also an assistant professor of psychology there. Prior to my life in academics, in 2004, I joined the fire service, and it's where I fell in love with the population that these videos are about. So thank you for your willingness to serve this population and for obviously having the heart that so many just don't see it as a unique population. So I wanted to take some time to talk to you about the mental health concerns that we see in the fire service. As a mental health clinician, I'm well acquainted with what firefighters look like when they come to you, when they're needing help, and sometimes it's hard to even notice that they're needing that help. So one of the reasons for that is firefighters in general tend to be excellent copers. They hold and hold and hold until they can't hold any longer. They decompensate really rapidly. There's an inherent level of resiliency within the fire service. One of those reasons is that they have a sense of purpose, a sense of duty, and then people tend to be happy when they see the fire department. There might be something bad that's going on in their life, but a fireman has never arrested anyone. A fireman has never chased you down. At least I hope not. Firemen show up and they try to make the situation better. So there's an inherent level of resiliency. Another thing that they do that is part of this coping is they tend to have a little bit of an off-color sense of humor. My firefighter side sees those jokes as absolutely hysterical. The assistant professor of psychology side sees those jokes as highly inappropriate. And I'll let you be the judge of what you want to decide that those jokes are classified. But aside from their ability to cope, these folks do at times struggle deeply with the things that they experience, the things that they go through. And then above even the fact that they're in the fire service, they're people, and sometimes things go wrong there. So one of the low-hanging fruit type of disorders that we see in the fire service is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, the problem with post-traumatic stress disorder is we tend to look for one event. There's some type of precipitating event where there's a real or threatened experience of their life, or they've learned about of a loved one. But this isn't always the case in the fire service for two reasons. One, I get a lot of phone calls before that 1 month has passed between the event. And the second is it's often difficult to nail down the one event that has led to this diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm a fan of using the new disorder in the DSM-5, acute stress disorder, as a way to engage these folks in some clinical help prior to that 1 month expiration date for PTSD. So what that gives me the ability is to talk to them, to help them process these real struggles that they're going through about whatever event that might have come to them. But again, I said that second problem that we find is it's hard to identify the singular event. These folks are experiencing trauma day in and day out. They're not uncommon for them to be on the side of the interstate and hear the rumble strips and them be just a few feet away from what could have been the end of their life, followed with just a couple of hours from watching someone leave this earth. I mean, it can be a very difficult job. So finding the one event means often we find a series of events. Now, I used to teach this in the fire service about a Rolodex. And I'm learning that firefighters are getting younger and younger, and they look at me a little funny when I say the word Rolodex. I usually have them Google it. It doesn't make any sense. But every time they experience some type of traumatic event, as benign as is going to a call, they're punching a Rolodex card, and that's getting in their brain somewhere. And because their coping skills involve objectification, not engaging with the material, not engaging with the emotional toll, if you ask a firefighter, how was your shift last night? They'll say things like, oh, we ran a stroke at midnight. Well, they didn't run a stroke. They went to Miss Smith's house, but it's easier to say we ran a stroke or we ran a code. And in the medical world, you do the same thing. Day in and day out, the objectification of human struggle means that ultimately we've got to pay the piper. So if you have a large-scale disaster in your area, some type of natural disaster or pretty immense human tragedy, don't be surprised for that firefighter to come in and say, it's not that thing that's bothering me. That flood, it's not bothering me. But ever since that night, I can't stop thinking about, and then they're going to give you their litany of calls. I like to teach them about like the compartment on their fire apparatus that they stuff everything into, and every department has an apparatus with that compartment. And eventually the hinge breaks on that compartment and it flies open going down the road, and all of that stuff starts to spill out. Referring them to some type of peer support program or psychotherapy gives them a chance to clean out that compartment, to talk about those traumas, to look at each of those Rolodex cards and give reverence to the reverent. This becomes one of the primary tasks in my clinical office, to say, here is something that your brain is struggling to process. How do we know your brain's struggling to process it? It keeps throwing it back up to you. It says, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? And when we give them those moments to say, well, talk to me about this card, we get to engage their brains, just phenomenal ability to process even the most gruesome of things. So early referral to peer support and psychotherapy, I think, is key when it comes to treating the fire service. So post-traumatic stress disorder and acute stress disorder, we refer to those in the mental health world as the great mimickers, because they tend to look like different disorders. So I'm a fairly anxious person. I don't know if I have a norepinephrine problem or not, but I can run a thought into the ground over 12 times and really elevate it before you can blink. So if I were to have post-traumatic stress disorder, or I would have experienced some type of significant trauma, rest assured, I would come to you looking like I was an anxious person. It would appear to you that I would need treatment with some type of anxiolytic. And though that might make my symptoms feel better, because I'm engaged in a pattern of avoidance, I will never recover from this anxious disorder, because it's really a trauma-related disorder. Now, the ruminators among us, and if we have female firefighters, we need to be extra cognizant of this, they tend to present trauma with a depression look. So they can't stop thinking about that thing that occurred, and they run through and through and through. And then the part of their psyche, that nice big frontal lobe that they've been given, will start to replay messages to them like, if you only would have, then this outcome would have been differently. And that starts to look like a depressive disorder. Now, again, a treatment with an antidepressant or an anxiolytic certainly might be indicated for to give some symptom relief, but ultimately not going to be the treatment modality that will bring them the most long-term relief. So what are we looking for? How do we know if we're dealing with a firefighter who's at risk? One of the biggest red flags is any type of change in behavior. You have that firefighter who comes in, your office staff loves to see this firefighter because they know that everybody's going to have a good belly laugh, just kind of a joy to the room. Typically coming in for that annual physical, maybe the fire department requires them to have. They come in and they're not sad, they're not depressed, they're just not themselves. Any subtle change in that personality is a big red flag. Much like pediatric patients, firefighters compensate for a long period of time before they rapidly decompensate into a level of pathology, a level of, well, stuck. They don't know where to go. That being said, if you're working with that firefighter who's now talking to you about a sudden career change, they've been in the fire service for 10 years, and now they're looking to get out of the fire service, consider this as if they're abandoning an identity, because this is the level of engagement that they have with the fire service. It's likely all that's written on their t-shirts. You know, you're looking at them in your office right now. They're telling you about they're going to get out of the fire service and they're wearing a fire department shirt. This is a huge red flag. So why do these red flags matter? Well, we know that firefighters are at an elevated risk for suicide. Research would suggest anywhere between 10 to 25 times the national average. To put this in perspective, that is significantly more than our combat veteran population. And one of the reasons is this prolonged compensation before rapid decompensation. In those moments, which Hans Selye discussed as exhaustion phase of stress, they no longer have that ability to cope. Everything starts opening from this compartment all at once, and just making it go away is beneficial. One of the ways that firefighters make it go away before suicide is alcohol. Alcohol use in the fire service is no secret, and it is a part of that culture. Now, unfortunately, that culture starts to run away. Under the influence of alcohol, things like suicide and life-changing decisions make a lot of sense. So encouraging that firefighter who's struggling to abstain from alcohol just during the struggle, right? And I know our job is to help them abstain forever, but if we're realistic, just through the struggle might be something that we can do as an intervention, which will have a life-saving property. Drug abuse is not uncommon in the fire service. The job is taxing on the body. So we'll see a lot of folks who struggle with opioid analgesics, Unfortunately, operating as a firefighter with an opioid analgesic is really difficult. So then they start looking for something to speed them back up so they can get to work. So they might come in asking you for both. I need a refill on my hydros, my back isn't any better, and I need a refill on my ADHD medication. This becomes one of those red flags type of polypharmacy situation. Are we modulating emotions or treating actual ailments? Becomes something that we need to be cognizant of. Again, the rest of the firefighter is nothing more than a human, at risk for all of the same types of disorders that any of your other patients might experience. However, they will be resistant to opening up. It's a closed culture, a closed system. If you open that door for them, however, firefighters tend to be good about stepping through that door, asking for help. They enjoy the medical terminology. Most all firefighters are dual trained in some type of a medical model. So talking to them about that panic attack isn't a monster that's coming. That panic attack is your hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis that's firing up. That will give them the knowledge so that when they're having that next attack, they won't have that catastrophic misinterpretation. They'll know what's going on in their body. And much like the GI Joes, they think that knowledge is power. So that's a pretty helpful thing. Again, I really appreciate your willingness to work with the fire service and your dedication to learning more about this unique population and their culture. It's a group that I obviously am very passionate about. And again, there are no amount of words to thank you for your willingness to work with this population also. So thank you very much.